Welcome to Brewing, the Homebrewers Edition. Today's video we're going to do for you will show you how to brew your first extract beer. It's not scary or intimidating, it's actually a lot of fun. There is some equipment, there's a couple of steps that go into it, but once you've done it, and if you follow this kind of tutorial, you'll find it's very, very easy. So first things first, recommend getting an extract kit. So go to your local homebrew store. They usually have different styles all packaged up for you in a really easy way to take it home and unpackage. I don't have a kit with me today, but I'm going to go over some of the basic ingredients that you'll find in those kits. So first and foremost, the biggest thing that you'll find in there is going to be a dried extract or a liquid extract. This is kind of the sugary, malty, fermentable stuff that's going to go in your fermenter. And this is what the yeast will eat and convert into alcohol and all those wonderful flavors that you get. The next thing that you'll find in there besides that are packets of hops. And there's many, many varieties of hops. Typically they're packaged in little 1 ounce packages, but you'll have a different variety of those. Those are part of the brew as well. You'll usually get a couple different bags of what's specialty grain and a grain sock that they'll go in. I already went ahead and put my specialty grain in a sock, and that will help add flavor and color to the beer that we're doing today. And then last but certainly not least is the yeast that you'll be using. Usually with the kits, they come with a dried yeast. Very, very easy to use. You also have options of using a liquid yeast, which we can go into more of the advanced tutorials later on. Either one is fine, either one works, but if this is your first batch, I strongly recommend do the dried yeast. It's so much easier to use. So in addition to the ingredients that you have, there are some equipment that you're going to need as well. Let me clear this off, and we'll go over what you need. The biggest purchase that you'll make, two of the biggest purchases you'll make will be a boiling pot. I recommend getting a stainless one. You can get them very, very inexpensively. And you want it to hold at least 2.5 gallons without it being too full, because when you boil, it's going to boil up a little bit. So 2.5 gallon stainless steel pot is great. You can use it on your kitchen stove. The other thing you're going to want to purchase is a fermenter. Now, I have a glass carboy here, and I've been using this one for probably close to 12 years. They last a very long time as long as you don't drop them and break them. You can ferment in food-grade plastic buckets. Those work very well. It's a very good, inexpensive option. They also make these in a clear, it's almost like a plastic, but it's a food-grade plastic. For me, I like the glass because of the longevity of it. If you're gonna go with a plastic option, the clear plastic carboys are great as well, because it's really cool to see that fermentation. Unless you've seen it, it's amazing how active it is and how much it churns. It's like watching a beer snow globe. It's a lot of fun. So the carboy is going to be important. You're going to want to get yourself a thermometer. A floating thermometer is great, because you're going to want to pop that bad boy right in the boil kettle. It'll tell you what temperatures you're hitting. It's very, very important. Temperature control is big. I recommend a spoon, a long-handled spoon. Doesn't necessarily have to be stainless. I love stainless, that's my thing. But it needs to be able to withstand boiling temperatures, because you're going to be stirring that pot a lot. So keep on to that. Measuring, you're going to want to get yourself a graduated cylinder. You can go glass or plastic, either way is fine. And you can get yourself a starter hydrometer. This is what you're going to use to measure the sugar content in your unfermented beer, or wort as it's called. You'll take your sample in the jar, you'll float this in there, and it will tell you exactly what the gravity is of your beer. It's important to do that at the beginning, before fermentation. You'll do it again at the end of fermentation, because then you can calculate how much alcohol is in that beer. Let's see what else we need. A nice big funnel is always helpful, because as you're putting your beer in your carboy, you want to make sure you have plenty of space to put it in there. A airlock, because once you get your beer in the carboy, you're going to want to lock it down to make sure that as this is venting CO2, which it does when it's fermenting, it's going to bubble out through this airlock, but it'll keep all the bad stuff from getting in there. This is a 3-piece airlock. You have your bung, which is standard with the carboys, and then your airlock breaks apart in 3 pieces. They make many variations of this. Anything will work. It doesn't have to be this one. It can be whatever's at your local homebrew store. Last but not least is sanitation. Sanitation is extremely important when you're making beer. You have to have everything be as clean as possible, because you don't want any off flavors. The yeast that you're using within your beer, you want to isolate and only have that be the thing that's in there fermenting. If you're not careful, you can let wild yeasts in, which are floating all around in the air. or wild bacteria, end up with a very different beer than the one that you intended. So sanitation is very, very important. The product that I use is Star San. This you dilute an ounce down in a 5-gallon bucket and you use it basically for the brew day. This is not your only option. There's a lot of options out there. You can use Ida 4, which is an iodine-based product. But basically, for me, what I like to do, dilute it down, put it in a bucket, and this is what we use for the day. The other benefit with the Star San is that I like to also put it in a spray bottle, so that as I'm going throughout the day, if I need to sanitize something real quick, either dunk it in the bucket or you can give it a spray. And that within about 30 seconds or so should sanitize it enough where you can make sure that nothing's getting bad into your beer. Okay? And I think that's it for the equipment. The other important aspect to brewing, because beer is predominantly made up of water, you gotta make sure you have a good water source that you're using. If your tap water tastes good, then you can use your tap water, that's fine. For me, I like to use bottled water because it's kind of easier to transport. As you get more advanced in your brewing, we can talk more about different types of water profiles and minerals, but for starting out, just plain old either tap water or even bottled water is fine. If you're using bottled water, get something with minerals in it. Don't get like a distilled water. It needs to have something in there, like a seasoning, like the minerals. So what I recommend for most beginning brewers, if you're doing your brew day, just go out to the store and get some inexpensive gallons of water. You'll need 2.5 gallons for the boil kettle. And then I recommend getting another 3 gallons that you can take and put them in the fridge overnight so they're nice and cold. So you will use your 2.5 gallons in the boil to start, and then you'll use this to help top it up in the fermenter and to cool it down. It'll help speed the process up to get your fermentation started faster. Remember that thermometer that we talked about before, the floating thermometer? So that's going to come in very handy right now because you can take it and just drop it right in the boil kettle and measure the temperature. Now, you want it to get up to about 250 degrees, and depending on how long it takes to get there, you're going to want to turn off your burner before it hits 250. Otherwise, if you stop it at 250, it's going to overshoot. You're going to go way past 250, and then you have to wait for it to come back down. So stop before, let it kind of coast up to it, and you have to ease into it, then you can. So once you check your temperature and it's at 250, perfect. Next, we're going to add what's called our specialty grains. So the specialty grains you'll take out of your beer kit, and you'll put it in a grain sock. This is the particular one that I'm using for today. These are important for the beer because they don't add sweetness, but this is where your color comes from. This is where your flavor comes from, depending on what you're brewing. If you're brewing a stout, this is where your dark chocolate, your roasty, toasty, coffee, chocolate, all those wonderful flavors come from. If you're doing an IPA, this is where those nice little sweetness from the crystal malt comes from to help balance the hops. These are super important. So take a grain sock, and you're basically making like a grain tea, if you will. You put it in, soak it a little bit, kind of dunk it in and out a little bit so that it soaks up the water. And then you're basically just going to let it sit for 30 minutes. Let it stay at 250. Don't do 250, that's bad. Do it at 150. So do it at 150 for about a half an hour and really let the water soak into those grains and really extract those flavors. So once 30 minutes has passed, check it. Okay, it's been 30 minutes, great. Your grain sock is all heavy and wet. You need to reach in there and you need to get it out. So there's a couple ways you can do it. You can use some tongs. If you have some nice like waterproof heavy duty gloves, you can use those too. Most beginners brewers don't have that. A stainless steel spoon is really a good option. So you're gonna go in there, you're gonna fish it out. Please be careful not to burn yourself. Grab it by the top of the sock. It's gonna be warm, so be careful. And you're gonna let it soak. And you're gonna let it drip and let all that water come out of there. What some brewers will recommend is that you take, say, a measuring cup or 2 cups of just water and you heat it up to about the same temperature and you just pour it over the top of the grain sock and let that rinse the grain out to get all those flavors out that you possibly can. For purposes of today's lesson, we're just going to let it drip and get all the stuff out of there. One important tip that you want to keep in mind is you never want to squeeze the grain bag to get all that liquid out of there. Okay? That's not a good thing to do. Squeezing it squeezes the husk on the grain, which extracts tannins. You don't want tannins in your beer. If you've never tasted tannins, think of if you put a black tea bag, if you just took a black tea bag and just put it in your mouth. Ugh, puckering feeling, grape skins, tannic. It's not a good flavor that you want in your beer. Once your grains have finished draining out, you got all those flavors out, you can take the bag and you can discard the whole thing. And then we move on to the next step. And that's really kind of where the fun starts to begin. you want to bring your 2.5 gallons of water to a boil. So go ahead and turn that burner on high. I'm gonna turn our fire on, and we'll get this thing up to boiling. So as it gets closer to boiling, which is gonna take some time, you wanna get your other stuff ready. So if you have your extract, your powdered or your liquid extract, you can go ahead and start to add it now as you're heating it up. It's important you wanna do it before it comes to a boil, especially for liquid extract, because it will sink to the bottom and it can scorch on the bottom of your pan. You really don't wanna burn that. So take your extract. I'm gonna go ahead and cut mine open. And just go ahead and kind of gently put it in. And as you're adding it, it's important to stir it in. Because if you just dump a whole bunch in there, it's gonna float on top. You'll have a hard time getting it to mix in. So go ahead and add it while stirring. And if there's more than one person that's doing it, that's helpful too. Have somebody stir while the other person's adding it. Okay. All right. And then once all of your extract is dissolved, then basically it's time to sit back and wait for it to boil. Now that is a very critical stage because you've added all this sweet malt extract and you've added it to all this liquid. And depending on how big your pan is, if your liquid is near the very top, you watch it like a hawk because there's a big chance for a boil over, right? As it comes to a boil, before it stabilizes, it will start to foam up and it will overflow. There's a couple different things you can use to help with that. If you don't have headspace in your pot, you shouldn't worry about it. It'll come up and then it'll die down on its own. Now, if you don't have a lot of room in your pot, there's defoaming products that you can use. Just check with your local homebrew store. I use, I can't think of the name of it now, but it is a defoamer. Just put a couple drops in there, kills the foam. And I wish I would have known about that when I was in the house brewing because it would have saved me a lot of headache and heartache. So yeah, now we just wait for it to come to a boil. All right, so we've got our wort, as it's called when it's not fermented yet. It's not beer yet, it's wort, up and boiling. We've got the foam to kind of settle down, so it's calmed down now. So now we're gonna do our first hop addition. So it's important that with the kit that you get, that you follow the hop schedule that's on there. We're only gonna be doing one hop addition for today, just a 60-minute hop addition. Your recipe may have several, so make sure you set a timer and keep track of when you're supposed to be adding that. Now, for the first hop addition, I went ahead and already weighed out our hops that we're gonna use, and they smell really good. Generally, you're gonna use the hop pellets, which is the easiest form to use, and you're really just to put them directly into the boil. It's important to wait for the foam to die down, because if it just starts to boil and that foam's coming up and then you throw these hops in there, you will have an explosion. So let it calm down, let the boil stabilize, and then you can keep going with it. So we're gonna add the hops now, and it's important, you can get on in there, and we're just gonna sprinkle them in. And you can see them starting to boil up. See how it's starting to boil a little bit more? And we're just gonna make sure they're all nice and mixed in. Ooh, that smells really good. Look at that. And they break apart and they dissolve, and all those wonderful hop oils will dissolve into that boiling liquid. And that's where you get a lot of that hop bitterness. That first hop addition, that 60-minute boil really makes it bitter. So if you're a hop head and you like IPAs, that 60-minute addition will be your friend. So again, follow your hop schedule all the way through that 60-minute boil or 90-minute boil, whatever the recipe calls for, and then just continue to take care of it and smell it, and you can taste it throughout. It's gonna be very bitter, but it's kind of neat to taste it throughout the process so you really understand how each hop addition affects it. And then we're just gonna wait for it to finish boiling, and then we'll start the next step, which is the cooling. Been boiling your beer for 60 minutes, and so now you're at the point where pretty much boiling is done. You've done all your hop additions, turn off your burner, and the thing's gonna be super hot, okay? So it's important that we wanna cool your beer down as quickly as possible because we wanna get it cool enough where we can put the yeast in and get the yeast to start fermenting before something else can kind of take hold into it. Now, on the hot side, when it's boiling, anything that falls in there or that gets in there is gonna be pretty much sterilized, sanitized. So we have a sanitary wort at this point. So what I always recommend in the kitchen, you're on your stove, you cut off the boil burner, go ahead and put your lid on it. Now, you're good from your boiling point, which is 212, down to about 180. That's kind of your safe zone. You're okay. If it's still just finished boiling, it's above 180, you can go in here, you can stir it around, you can do your thing. There is no danger on the hot side. we're going to be transitioning onto the cold side of the fermentation. So you want to make sure that you are being very safe and sanitary. And from this point forward, anything that comes in contact with your wort has been in that sanitizer or sprayed down by your sanitizer. Okay, want to make sure everything's very, very cool. So you got your lid on it, it's protected, nothing can fall into it. You're going to take this, transition it over to your sink in the kitchen. Put it in your sink, pack some ice around it, run some water around the side of it so it's kind of circulating, and we're transferring that heat off and we're dropping the temperature. The goal is to do it as quickly as possible, but from a homebrew standpoint in your kitchen with a lot of ice, it may still take you half hour, 45 minutes to get you down to where you need to be. Some of the other options as you upgrade that might make things a little bit faster, you can build what's called an immersion chiller. Now, all this is copper pipe that's wrapped in a coil, and it has two outlets on it. One where you're putting fresh water in that's cold, and one where you're exiting the hot water that's coming out. And you're taking this whole copper coil and you're chilling it down and making it cool. And so this, you would immerse in your kettle and you run this through it, and it would chill it down much faster than just using the ice bath. This is a good option, but generally better if you're out in the garage versus the kitchen, although there are some people that have built some to use in their kitchen to speed up the cool down process. But for our first batch today, an ice bath is perfect. It's all you really need to do and get this thing down. So our goal temperature for fermentation, depending on the yeast that you're using, you want to be around 70 degrees. So 72, 73 is probably okay. For me and what I like to do, it's a little bit on the high side for me. Still makes great beer. I like to ferment myself at 68 degrees. I feel like that's kind of the sweet spot where it's not too cold, where the yeast is going to get in there and just kind of fall asleep, but it's not too warm. For most of the ales that a lot of people are doing, there's a very wide temperature range, and you don't need to stress about it. It's gonna turn out fine. It's gonna be great, okay? While it's still hot, I'm gonna go ahead and put this in there so that we can check our temperature as it falls. And so now, put it in the sink, ice bath, and we'll just let it cool down. So you have your pot of wort that's been in the sink with the ice. It's been circulating, it's been cooling down, and you're feeling the pot, because you don't want to take the lid off, feeling the pot, you're like, okay, that feels about right, it's good. You can take the temperature, the thermometer that's sitting in there, check the temperature, make sure that it's about the 70-degree mark is what you're aiming for. And if that's good, then if you're using a pot in the sink, go ahead and take it out, go ahead and dry it off. And what you're gonna do is take your funnel that's now sanitized, put it on top of your carboy, and you're gonna take your pot and you're gonna gently, without spilling as much as possible, pour it into your fermenter. Now, I have a kettle that actually has a little ball valve on it, so what I'm gonna do is grab some sanitizer. And like I said, spray bottle is your friend with this Star Sand. We're gonna sanitize that real quick. I'm gonna open up my valve, and we're gonna start to drain it out. Maybe. There we go. All right, now as that's draining, go ahead and try to splash it if you can. If you're pouring it from a pot, try to splash it as much as you can as well without making too big of a mess. You obviously don't want to trash your kitchen. The splashing is important because you're introducing oxygen into the wort that's coming in there. Oxygen is very important for the yeast as they're multiplying and they're producing that alcohol and making those flavors. The oxygen helps them to multiply, have a nice healthy fermentation. You have a wonderful tasting beer, so it's very, very important. So we're gonna pour all of our 2.5 gallons into our carboy, and then we're gonna finish chilling it down. One thing that I made a mistake on, I'm sorry, I'm used to my normal process where I get my kettle down to 70 before I transfer into the fermenter. When you're doing it in your kitchen, the way that I've kind of designed this cooling process, you only need to get your kettle in your sink down to about 110. So you got 2.5 gallons here at 110, and you have your 3 gallons of chilled water at about 40-45 degrees. So if you take your 2.5 gallons of 110, you add 3 gallons of that cold water, it should equalize about 70 degrees. So that will save you a bunch of time when you're chilling this down, and it'll get you down to the correct temperature that you need to be. So one thing to mention with our particular lesson that we did today, make sure that you can use a 5.5 gallon carboy, but if you'll notice right at the 5 gallon mark, there's not a lot of headspace within the carboy itself. So if you're doing this, make sure you keep an eye on it. Make sure you use a good defoamer to make sure it does not foam up, because it will get a head on it and it will start to push out. If you are using something like this, just put a towel around it. Everything's going to clean up, so it's not a big deal. But for your first beer, again, this is a 5 gallon carboy. They make them in 6 gallons, 6.5 gallons. It gives you plenty of headspace, less likely event for a eruption, for lack of a better term. And I've had some good ones. But just as a disclaimer, and it'll help make things cleaner too. Okay, so you have your wort secure in your carboy. You've got your sample that you've taken of the wort so you can get the original gravity, and we'll check that here in just a minute. First thing I want to do is make sure we secure this down before something kind of take hold into it. So we've got it at the ideal temperature. So first things first, we're going to, actually we don't need the funnel yet, but I am going to sanitize my hands. We have our packet of yeast, or dried yeast. Now there's a couple different ways that you can add the yeast into the carboy to start fermentation. They're not necessarily more advanced steps, but there's different ways to do it. For the sake of keeping this simple, if this is your first or second or third batch, we're gonna take this and pitch directly into the carboy. It's simple, it's easy, you'll yield great results. Later on, we can talk about more of the advanced methods for pitching the yeast, as it's called, and the benefits of that. So we're gonna just cut the top off of there. And we're just going to sprinkle it on top. Super easy. Okay, that will go in the trash. Now we got to go into our sanitizing bucket and find our airlock. Look at that. I'm a pro. I did that the first try. That's great. We're going to take a little bit of that sanitizer and put it inside of our airlock. And then we're going to put this thing together. So put the piece in there. Put this guy on top. So now we have our 3 pieces. Things can bubble out, but they can't go back in. That's very, very important. We'll put this guy on the bottom, and we'll lock it in on top of that. Perfect. So now, for 5 gallons of beer, as it's now called, because we've officially added yeast, it is no longer considered wort, it is considered beer. So we'll put this in a nice, cool place so it stays around 70 degrees for about 2 weeks or so. 21 days at the very, very most, and we'll keep an eye on it. This airlock will become your monitor. This will tell you how fermentation is going. Within about 24 to 48 hours, you should start to see activity. You'll start to see a little foam build up on the top of this. You'll see this thing start to bubble. As it gets more active, you will hear it start to bubble. You'll see a lot of the sediment in the bottom that had kind of settled out will suddenly start to lift, and it will start to churn and go, and the yeast will multiply, and it will turn this into a delicious, wonderful beer. We'll talk about the next steps in a couple of weeks as far as bottling it and kind of finishing it out, but otherwise, that's pretty much finished for this batch. So we hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to kind of shoot us a message and let us know. Otherwise, have fun.